you know, what trips your trigger in the morning? What gets your heart going? To me, it's cattle, and the sheep is right behind them. And then 3, I mean, I just really enjoy working with the land and the interns and the guard dogs and all the mushrooms. It all just starts falling in from that. So animals that can self-harvest their food, that's what I'm all about. And that's why cattle are number 1 and sheep are number 2. So there's the Tamworth. We actually ran them with the sheep. We had a renegade group of sheep on the cattle farm. And these are sheep that wouldn't stay in. And I sold most of them, but there was 40 of them that got out. They wouldn't stay in. And they were from Texas. They weren't used to staying in fence. They just went wherever they wanted to go. Well, I picked out the 8 best ones, and I sold the other 32. I kept 8 out of 40. I picked the nice big fat ewes and kicked them out on that farm with the cows and like, you either make it or you don't. We had goats in there too with those cows. And there was a guard dog over there that lived with the goats. And it took 2 years for those goats to accept those sheep. They wouldn't graze together. They're like, no, that's not a goat. We're not going to hang out with you all. And they finally, after 2 years, because that always made me a little nervous, the sheep out there, and they didn't have a guard dog with them. The guard dog was with the goats. And I'm like, man, I'm going to lose sheep. But the sheep learned to stay with the cows. They're always in the vicinity of the cows, because there was a lot of coyotes on this farm. But we never lost any lambs. And we actually lambed with the pigs. And everybody was talking about, you've heard people say, well, that hog would eat that baby lamb. Well, he would if he could get close to it. But that little ewe there, she weighs about 120 pounds. She's looking at that 250-pound pig like, dude, you take one more step, I'm going to nail you. And we saw that a lot. I mean, they would. That little ewe would take off running and hit that hog just as hard as she could right in the side. I seen it. And that pig would let out a scream and take off running. And so that's that hog knows that's about as close as he wants to get, or he's going to get attacked. Those pigs, to get them bonded onto the cows, I fed those pigs corn in the springtime. We first got them. We got them, they were probably 40 to 60-pound feeder pigs. And they didn't know, they'd never seen a cow before. And the cows had never seen a pig. And it was a real rodeo for a while. I mean, it was. Those pigs, they get close to the cow. The pigs are so curious. And they'd go up, how y'all doing? And them cows are bawling. They're circling their calves up in a circle, and they were just all in a circle like it was amazing to watch. And the bull was in the front. The bull was in the front. He's like, don't you come up here. And the bull, he was the most, he just loved everybody, you know. And he'd walk up, and that dang bull would hit him. He'd let out a squeal, whee, and he'd go right on into the cows. Said, no, I want to see the rest of y'all. And he just kept on going. And those cows are bawling and running in circles. And I'm like, they're going to run them cows through the fence. And this went on for 24 hours, a full day. The next day I went out there. There's a pig grazing. There's a cow grazing. They worked it out. And the rest of summer, it was no problem. They didn't even care about the pigs. They just didn't care about them. They'd lay down in the shade, and I'll tell you how good the pigs would lay down right now, and they'd even be touching a cow, laying there sleeping in the shade. And I wasn't this sharp, but Jan was. She knows those darn pigs would go up to a cow. In the summertime, it was really hot, and they'd run out of manure to roll in. They'd bump a cow to get it up. They'd bump that cow, and that cow would get up, empty out, and the hog, he'd roll in that manure. They'd run out of stuff to roll in. That pig learned to bump a cow to get a manure pie. So this is an invasive that we have. This is called autumn olive. It is taking over the whole Midwest. The conservation department brought that in there. This tree was brought from China in the 1700s, 1800s as hedges. In China, they use them as hedges. And somebody brought them over here for wildlife habitat. and started propagating into the conservation departments all through the Midwest. And believe it or not, I would buy them. You can buy 25 of them for $5. These little autumn olive trees. And man, they didn't tell us they would get loose, and they did. They've got a red berry on them. I mean, thousands. They're actually quite good. I love eating autumn olive berries. So if you like sour, you'll like autumn olive. If you don't like sour, you're not going to like them. But they're really good for you. Anyway, that's the same tree right over here. So that was before. That's a closer picture. I got up close and took that one. But that was done with cattle, not sheep. That was done with cattle. Now, I had them in very high stocking density. It's hard to find an autumn olive tree that isn't nipped on. The deer love them, and they just constantly are nipping on the tips of those leaves. So to me, it's another invasive that we've got to control on certain landowners. They don't like them. But we leased the farm 3 years ago. It's 120 acres, and it had great big ones on it, out in the field, out in the pasture. I took out all the cedar and all the honey locusts, but I left those great big autumn olives because I didn't have any shade out there. And I talked the landowner into letting me do that, and he goes, well, I don't want them getting loose on my farm. I said, they won't. I said, I'll brush hog your field every year, and I do. I go out there in July, about the end of July, and I'll brush hog it, make it look nice. That's what he wants. And he lets me get to keep the autumn olive trees. But folks, we got 350 to 400 head of cattle. On a hot day, they get in around those, and they put out a lot of shade, the big one does, and those cattle are comfortable under there. So they can rub the flies off their back on that. I mean, the deer like them. I've seen turkeys kind of huddle up underneath them in storms. So be careful, this brush control. Once you kill a tree that size, it's going to take you 10 to 15 years to get that tree back. And I made that mistake starting out on a lot of my lease farms. I was so centered on, I want grass, I want grass, I want grass, that I cut too many of the trees on some of our farms. So don't make that mistake. You can always take them out later. Bring the animals in, graze it, and see which trees are kind of in the way, or maybe we could do without that one because it's competing with this one, and mark them. Whenever you do tree management, you're going out to take out some trees, leave your chainsaw at home. Have a roll of ribbon and tie a piece of ribbon on the trees you want to keep. There's probably going to be more that you want to take out on a really brushy area. So tie a ribbon on the ones you want to keep. If you go out with the chainsaw, you're going to cut some trees you shouldn't have cut. But it's a lot easier to go out there and mark them first, and then you can just cut. But don't do it the other way around. Yeah, so they graze differently. The cattle are more grass and legume, and sheep like legumes too. Anything with a broadleaf is food for a sheep or a goat. Sheep and goats will eat grass. Like right now, our sheep flock is we're giving them big paddocks. We're moving them fairly quickly because we're growing winter stockpile right now, and I don't want those sheep to take our grass down too short. They're not even touching the Kentucky 31. They're going after the clover, which doesn't bother me a bit because we're in October, what's the day, 13th? 14th. Our first killing frost in central Missouri is usually October 10th. So we've already stole 3 or 4 days from Mother Nature. She didn't frost our clover yet. So I'm just letting the sheep graze the clover. That doesn't bother me because it's going to get frosted anyway and it'll turn brown. So if I can put extra weight on a sheep by letting them eat that clover, and they're not even touching the fescue, that's good. Because now the fescue is getting a free ride. It's just going. And that's what we'll eat in the wintertime. So multi-species, this is Ian's area in Africa. He's got, of course he doesn't have the buffalo, but I'm sorry, buffalo, elephants. He does have these, and he sells these. So in Africa, when you own the ranch, you also own the wild game. There is no seasons on hunting. You own it, you can harvest them any month or any day of the year you want. And Ian sells these to Europeans. They like shooting those things, and they'll mount that head and put it on their office wall. And Ian gets $2,500 for a warthog hunt. And he's like, that's an ugly thing to be hanging on your wall, but you take the money. So he calls it harvesting solar energy at a different level. So in kudu, he's got some massive kudu on his ranch, big ones. I got one. We were moving cattle one morning, and there was a bunch of big kudu bucks that came through. Ian, when he moves his cattle, he always brings a 30-06 with a silencer on it. I'm like, what's that silencer? You get arrested in the United States for carrying that around. He said, this is Africa. And I said, what's the silencer on that for? He said, so I can shoot more than one. They don't hear the shot, and you can shoot as many as you want. And he sells kudu. He sells the meat. They can sell wild game right off the ranch. I'm like, man, you guys just don't have any rules over there, do you? He goes, nope. He said, we have laws, but nobody follows them. And so that's the way it is. But he talks about, if you're going to manage your farm and you attract these other species to come on there, in our area, it's deer and turkey. Those are the two big ones. Can you sell that? Yes, you can. Now, you can't sell the animal. You can't sell the animal, but you can sell a chance to pursue that animal. We're getting $1,800 a year for a gun. So if you come into our farm, it's $1,800. You can pursue a deer or you can pursue a turkey. That's $1,800 that we wouldn't have got if we hadn't sold that hunt. We like stuff that can feed itself. So I don't want to be supplementing these animals. I don't want to give my money to the grain guys. I mean, they have more market. They can go make biodiesel with it or whatever. I don't want to be buying their corn. I want animals that can make it with what grows on our farm. And folks, they need to be fertile. We're going to talk, I've got a whole section on how to grass genetics. We're going to be talking about that. And you got to be willing to call animals. There's that kudu. So that's what Ian sells in Africa. Now, to pursue that on his ranch, he gets $10,000 to shoot one of those. Well, my goodness, if you get to harvest 8 or 10 of those a year, that's getting up there equaling your calf crop, So items to think about, we've got to have fence. Fence is number one. So those you all knew, just getting into livestock, folks, don't bring livestock onto your farm till you get fence. We sell a lot of cattle to a lot of people, and this year, and a lot of sheep. We had a couple wrecks, newbies getting started, and the cattle were dropped off at their farm, and they had polywire up. That was it. Polywire is not a fence. It's not a permanent fence. It's great for moving cattle, but you can't bring animals onto your farm if all you've got is polywire for your perimeter. You've got to have a fixed fence. And that can either be multiple strands of high tensile, which is what we use, 5 to 6 strands, high tensile wire, electrified, 170,000 PSI. Don't use aluminum wire. 170,000 PSI steel wire, not aluminum. Deer hit aluminum wire or a cow hits aluminum wire, it's busted. They're gone. Tree falls on it, it's broke. High tensile, it just takes it to the ground. It'll pop right back up. Now, I will give you this. Aluminum is more conductive, but it has no break strength at all. It just breaks. So I'm not going to use aluminum. Make sure you have a good fence. Water, most people overbuild on water. I've got a whole section on water we're going to talk about. To graze year-round, you must manage the forage. Sunlight collecting business. That's what we're in. We're in the sunlight collecting business. Don't forget that. You got to be able to collect it. And you can't collect it if you don't have any leaves. And if you're not managing that leaf height, you're not going to be able to collect very much solar energy. You're not going to make any money. But you got to have fence. I asked Ian once, I said, what's the most profitable thing that you can invest in on your farm? You know what his answer was? Fence, not water, fence. Now you do have to have some water, but cattle can walk. But he said fence. Fence gives you control where they're at. And if you can't control where those animals are at on your farm, you're not going to have any kind of rotation at all. They're going to be rotating all right freely across your farm. And now you're out of business. You might as well just sell them because they're going to eat your farm off. It's going to look like this carpet. And they'll do it. It may take them a while, but they will do it. So there's solar energy harvesters. We had a guy come by. He saw those cows on that. There's only about 2 acres there, and there was about 400 head in there. Oh, gosh, it made him mad. He looked at that. He said, you're stressing those cows. I'm like, really? They look pretty stressed. Everything was eaten. Everything had a big old gut on it, slick hair coats on them. He said, what you're doing there is wrong. He said, you need to take up that wire and give them the whole farm. The animals do better, the ground will do better, and you'll do better. That's what he told me. And he did it with a serious face. And as he drove off, he had a big round bale stuck on the back of his truck. And this was in July. He was already feeding hay. He was peeved. Yeah. So that's what you got to be willing to take. You know, he was trying to intimidate me. And he was an older guy, kind of high in the community. Everybody thought a lot of him. And he was a bully. You know, I didn't take it. I just said, well, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And I said, they're not stressed. I said, this is the second time today they've been moved. And he's like, well, it ain't right. I'm like, okay. So you can't change everybody. You gotta have that secure perimeter fence. Paddock divisions. I'm real big about not putting those in on a new farm immediately, not permanent paddock divisions. If it's, now, granted, if you've got a huge farm, 1,000 acres, you can't go out to a poly wire and go all the way across that and rotate them conveniently. You're gonna need to split that up a little bit with some high tensile paddock divisions, with some water points to do it effectively. Because if you have to roll up 3 or 4 rolls of wire every day to go across that farm, you're gonna quit. You're not gonna do that. It's gonna be too much work. But that's where the portable fencing comes in. It is very economical. And we're gonna talk about the tools, the right tools to use. Folks, this is one that people really get hung up on. I did a consult in Iowa about 3 months ago, and this guy, he only had 2 little herds. He had like 20 cows, and he'd taken the calves off. He had like 20 calves. And somehow he got in his mind reels, and he had this great big roll of, I think it was poly tape, and it was on this thing. It looked like it belonged on a highway construction. It must have weighed 150 pounds. He had 2 of them, one for the stalkers and he's after packing. He said, it takes me 3 hours to move them cows, and he didn't have any permanent wire up anywhere. It was a wreck, and he wasn't moving the cows very fast because it was so much work. He had them in way too tight, covered in flies, laying in manure and mud, and he'd only grazed 20% of his farm for the whole year. He hadn't even made 1 rotation yet. Anyway, life is good for him again. He's got the right tools, and he's like, oh, he said, I can't believe how dumb I was. And this was a guy that was very successful in another business, and he came back to the farm, and he thought he'd be successful in the farm because he's successful in his town job. He didn't have the right tools. He just didn't know any better. It wasn't that he was dumb, he just didn't know. Just didn't know. There's the pigs as they get bigger. We were running those with 1 wire. Now those pigs are up there about 120, probably 130 pounds right there. But when they're little guys, I've got to talk on that, how we break them. So it's more products to offer your customers. You got multiple marketing streams of product coming in, and it spreads your marketing costs over more products. Each product brings a different customer in. So I was on, Joel Salton. We were there 3 weeks ago. We did the Stockman GrassFarming School up there. You know, Joel said, we don't make a lot of money on our eggs. He said, but it brings the customers to the farm. And that's what we found when we had chickens on our farms. They didn't make a lot of money with them, but they were able to bring a lot more pork customers in to buy the pastured pork that they were buying. So, and the chickens, you know, they add a lot of fertility and they scratch a lot of manure. Yeah, so fill the cooler with 1 trip. There was a guy in Florida Dennis Stoltz Foods. He's up by Clearwater, Florida. And he's running an all-grass dairy. And he was milking, at that time, about 20, I think he had about 28 Jersey cows. And he's doing once a day milking. He just milked them once a day in the morning, that was it. No grain. And those cows are broke to come up and stand on a rubber mat. And he had a little 2x4 he put behind their head to keep them in the stanchion. And he had a little surge milker right in the middle that went to 2 cows. So he milked 2 at a time. And he was selling raw milk as pet food because he couldn't sell raw milk in Florida at that time. I don't know if the laws may change now, but at that time you couldn't sell it. Same. So he had to put a little sticker on every gallon, pet food. And he was selling that stuff for $17 a gallon. And he just couldn't produce enough. And then he was selling yogurt, pastured pork, he had the chickens, he had the broilers. I mean, there's people coming there from Orlando with coolers. I've never seen coolers that big before. And what they were doing, they would just fill that cooler. And I saw some of the checks those guys wrote out to him. And I mean, he was getting, some of those guys were walking away with $2,500 worth of meat, milk, and cheese. And they were just so happy.